Taxi driver took a midnight ride. When he arrived, a crying widow whispered, "Stay with me tonight." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. It was a stormy night in November, the kind of night when the city seemed to hold its breath. The rain hammered on the windshield as Jack Rivers tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his yellow cab. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:47 p.m., one more ride before calling it a night. His radio crackled with static. Then a faint female voice came through the dispatch. "Pickup. Ridgeview Hill. Please don't cancel." The voice trembled like someone holding back tears. Jack hesitated. Ridgeview Hill was miles out, a dark road lined with woods and no streetlights. But something in that voice, fragile, pleading, made him press accept. 10 minutes later, his headlights cut through sheets of rain as he turned onto the gravel road. The wipers screeched across the glass. Then he saw her. A woman in a long black dress stood under a broken street lamp, her hair plastered to her face, mascara streaked by tears. She wasn't holding an umbrella, just a small silver clutch clutched like a lifeline. Jack slowed, rolled down the window. "Ma'am, did you call for a cab?" She nodded weakly, eyes glinting with grief. Her voice cracked. "Yes, please. Ridgeview Hill, number 47. He got out, opened the back door for her, rain soaking through his jacket. As she slid in, he caught the scent of roses and rainwater. When he glanced in the rearview mirror, she was staring out the window, whispering something he couldn't hear. The road wound higher into the hills, and the rain turned to fog. Jack tried to make small talk, but her silence was heavy, like a confession left unsaid. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, "I can't sleep there alone tonight." He frowned. "You got someone waiting for you." "Not anymore," she said softly. A flash of lightning illuminated her face, pale, haunted. Jack felt something twist inside him, an echo of a pain he thought he'd buried years ago when his wife died on a night just like this. The road curved sharply, tires splashing through puddles. "We're almost there," he said. She didn't answer, only reached into her bag and pulled out a small cassette tape, holding it tight like it was keeping her heart from breaking apart. When they arrived, the house loomed out of the fog, a white mansion, old and still, its windows dark except for one flickering light upstairs. Jack parked, turned to ask if she wanted help with the gate, but before he could speak, she leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Stay with me tonight, please." For a moment, the only sound was the rain drumming on the roof. Jack froze, torn between reason and something deeper, an instinct that told him this woman wasn't asking for company. She was asking for safety. He swallowed hard, nodded once. "All right, ma'am. I'll stay until you're safe." She exhaled, a tremor of relief passing through her shoulders. As they stepped into the storm together, the door of the mansion creaked open like a breath long held, and neither of them knew that this night would change everything. The heavy oak door groaned as Jack pushed it open, following Evelyn Shaw into the dark mansion. The storm howled outside, slamming against the windows as if trying to break in. Inside, the air was still and cold, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten memories. A single lamp flickered in the hallway, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Evelyn dropped her clutch onto a table, her hands trembling. "The power goes out sometimes," she said quietly, her voice barely holding steady. Jack nodded, setting his soaked cap on the counter. "Where should I check first?" "The generator is in the basement," she murmured, brushing wet hair from her face. "But I cannot go down there alone." Something in her tone made him pause. This was not just about the dark. This was about fear. He gave a small, reassuring smile. "Then I will go with you." The basement smelled of damp concrete and metal. Their footsteps echoed as they descended the narrow stairs, light from Jack's phone trembling against the walls. Pipes groaned above them. Evelyn's breath quickened. Jack found the generator, flipped the switch, and the hum of power returned. "See? Easy," he said, forcing a grin. But when he turned, Evelyn was staring at an old portrait half buried under a tarp. Her and a man in a tuxedo, smiling, frozen in time. She whispered, "That was the last photo before everything." Jack lowered his voice. "Your husband?" She nodded, tears gathering. "He died 2 weeks ago. They said it was an accident, but nothing about it feels right. And since then, the house has not felt like mine." Jack hesitated, wanting to ask more, but the storm cracked outside, shaking the windows. "Let us go upstairs," he said softly. They climbed back up, and Evelyn lit candles around the living room. The golden light softened her face, revealing both beauty and exhaustion. Jack sat near the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "You should rest," he said. "I will wait here until the weather clears." She turned toward him. "You do not have to stay all night. I promised you I would, remember?" He replied with a small smile. That drew the faintest laugh from her, the first since they met. "You sound like him," she said quietly. "He always kept his word." Jack looked away, unsure how to answer. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere deep in the house, a door creaked. Evelyn flinched. Jack stood up, scanning the hallway. "Stay here," he whispered. He moved through the corridor, every floorboard complaining beneath his boots. The noise came from a study at the end of the hall. He pushed the door open, nothing but bookshelves and a desk covered with papers. Then he saw it. The same cassette tape from the car, lying on the desk beside an old player. Curious, he pressed play. A man's voice filled the air, deep, weary. "If you are hearing this, it means I failed to stop them. Trust no one at the company." The crash was not an accident. Jack froze. Behind him, Evelyn stood in the doorway, pale as the candles. "You found it," she whispered. "I was not sure it even existed anymore." Jack turned off the player gently. Who was he accusing? She wrapped her arms around herself. His partner. They built the company together. But after the crash, all evidence disappeared. Everyone called me paranoid. Jack's mind raced. "And that is why you called a cab at midnight? You were afraid." "Afraid," she echoed, nodding slowly. "And lonely. I thought if someone stayed here with me, the house would stop feeling like a grave." The words lingered between them. Outside, thunder rolled again. Jack stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "You are not alone tonight. I promise." She met his eyes, searching for deceit but finding none. For the first time, she exhaled without shaking. The storm began to fade, the wind easing into silence. In the quiet, only the soft hiss of the fireplace remained. Evelyn sat down near it, pulling the coat he had given her tighter around her shoulders. "Jack," she said softly, "thank you." He nodded, settling into the chair opposite her. Neither spoke again. Somewhere beyond the fogged windows, dawn was beginning to break. The fire crackled softly in the corner, casting long shadows on the walls as Jack sat across from Evelyn. The house had finally settled into a quiet stillness, the storm outside now only a memory, though the tension between them still lingered. Evelyn's face, though soft from the warmth of the fire, still held a distant, guarded look. Jack could sense the weight of her grief, but there was something else, something darker, that had been left unspoken, hanging in the air. "Tell me more about what you think happened," Jack said, breaking the silence, his voice gentle but firm. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup absent-mindedly as she stared into the fire. "I don't know how to explain it," she finally whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "It's not just the crash, it's everything that happened afterward. I know my husband. I knew him better than anyone. And he wouldn't have left me in the dark like this. He wasn't the kind of man to make mistakes like that." She paused, looking up at Jack, her eyes filled with a quiet desperation. "I think someone wanted him dead. I think they planned it." Jack leaned forward slightly, listening carefully. "And what about the company? Do you think someone in your husband's business might be behind it?" Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze shifting to the cassette tape on the table, the one Jack had found earlier. "I don't know, but I think the answer is in there. Those tapes. My husband was recording something before it happened. Something important. I found them after he died, hidden in his office. I didn't know what to do with them." Her voice cracked slightly, the weight of her words heavier than the storm outside. Jack stood up, pacing slowly. "So you kept them hidden, hoping someone would come to find the truth?" Evelyn's head dropped slightly, the weight of the admission sinking in. "I didn't know who to trust. Everyone around me seemed to either be mourning or moving on with their lives. No one seemed to care about finding the truth, only about who would inherit everything." She shook her head in disbelief, as if she couldn't quite understand how easily people could let things go, how easily they could forget the man who had built everything. And now you've come. I didn't know what to think when you offered to help. I was too afraid to believe someone would. Jack walked over to the window, his reflection mixing with the misty fog outside. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Evelyn, left alone in this mansion with nothing but the past haunting her. You're not alone, Evelyn, he said, turning back to her. Not tonight. We'll find out what happened. I promise you that. She looked at him, her eyes searching, weighing his words carefully. For the first time since they had met, she seemed to relax, the tension easing from her shoulders. She let out a breath, a quiet sigh of relief, but there was still a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I want to believe you, she said softly, but I don't know who to trust anymore. The only thing that keeps me going is the thought that I might find some justice for him. Jack stepped toward her, a small but reassuring smile on his face. Then let's start by listening to these tapes, he said. He reached for the cassette player, his fingers brushing the worn surface of the recorder. As he pressed play, the familiar voice of Evelyn's husband filled the room, a voice Jack had only heard in passing on the phone, never in person. If you're hearing this, then it means I didn't make it. I don't know who I can trust anymore, but if you're listening to this, you have to know the truth. They're coming for me, Evelyn. They want what's mine. The crash wasn't an accident. It's all part of their plan. And you have to be careful. Jack paused. The tape, his heart racing as he glanced at Evelyn. Her face had gone pale, her hands trembling. Who is he talking about? Jack asked. I think I know who he means, Evelyn whispered, a mix of fear and determination in her eyes. It's my husband's business partner, Harold Langston. He's the one who's been acting strange lately, always hovering around my husband, trying to take control of the company. I thought it was just business, but now, her voice trailed off, and Jack could see the horror building in her eyes. Now I think he's behind it all. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The name Harold Langston wasn't unfamiliar to him. He had heard whispers of him in the past, rumors of shady deals, backdoor business, and a reputation for being cutthroat. He had never paid much attention to it until now, but the truth was beginning to come into focus. What do we do now? Jack asked. Evelyn stood up slowly, her hands still shaking, but her voice was stronger now. We go after him, she said, her eyes hardening with resolve. And we find out the truth, no matter what it takes. The next morning, the house was quieter than usual, the stillness of the mansion hanging like a heavy fog. Jack and Evelyn sat at the large wooden table in the dining room, the early light from the windows casting long shadows across the room. Evelyn was quiet, her mind clearly working through the new revelations from the tape, and Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. What now? He asked, his voice steady but full of urgency. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She picked up her coffee cup, her fingers lightly tracing the rim, lost in thought. Then, after a long pause, she looked up, her expression determined. We need to find proof. I can't just go to the police with a few tapes and a hunch. We need something concrete, something that ties Harold Langston directly to what happened to my husband. Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Do you have access to his files? Anything that might show something suspicious? Evelyn's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and resolve. I do. My husband kept everything. He was paranoid about security. He always thought someone was trying to get to him, trying to take what he built. She paused, staring down at the table, her fingers now tapping nervously. The only problem is, Langston controls most of the company's legal records, and I'm not sure I can get to them without raising suspicion. We'll have to be careful. Jack stood up, his hand on the back of the chair, thinking through their options. Then we'll be careful, he said. We'll do this smart. Start by gathering whatever you can get from your husband's office. If there's something there, we'll find it. Evelyn nodded, her face softening just a little, as if the weight of the decision had lifted slightly. All right, she said, her voice a little steadier. But we need to move quickly. Langston isn't stupid. If he's been planning this for a while, he'll be covering his tracks. We can't afford to wait. The tension in the room was palpable as they made their plans. Jack followed Evelyn through the mansion, his eyes scanning the house, always alert, knowing that they could be walking into danger. They reached the study, where Evelyn had found the cassette tapes the night before. The door creaked as they entered, and Evelyn went straight to the desk, opening a drawer and pulling out a thick folder of documents. She spread them out on the desk, her fingers flipping through them with practiced ease. "These are the company's financial records," she said. "I'll look through them and see if there's anything unusual." Jack stood by the window, keeping watch as Evelyn went through the documents. He could hear her muttering to herself as she flipped through the papers, each page bringing more pieces of the puzzle into focus. "Here," she said suddenly, her voice sharp. "This doesn't add up. Langston withdrew a huge sum of money a few months ago, just before the accident. And then there's this." She slid another paper across the desk toward him. "An insurance policy. A large one. My husband had no idea about it. Langston must have forged his signature." Jack's heart raced as he picked up the document, scanning it quickly. It was all there. Everything they needed to show that Harold Langston had been planning something sinister. The pieces were finally falling into place. "This is it," Jack said, his voice low. "This is the proof we need." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with both relief and apprehension. "What now?" she asked. "We go to the authorities," Jack said, his voice firm. "But we need to make sure we have everything in place first. We don't know how far Langston's influence goes, or what he'll do to cover his tracks." Evelyn nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I won't let him get away with it," she said, her voice hard. "Not after what he did to my husband. And not after what he's done to me." The room fell silent as they both processed the weight of their next move. The stakes were higher now, the danger real. But they had a plan, and for the first time in days, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. They would take down Langston, and they would find justice for her husband. It was time to finish what they had started. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation, every moment filled with the urgency of their mission. Jack and Evelyn worked in tandem, scouring the files she had gathered from her husband's study, piecing together the web of lies Harold Langston had woven. They were careful, meticulous, knowing that one wrong move could expose them to danger. The walls of the mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a prison, each room echoing with the weight of their secrets. It was late one evening when Evelyn received a call, the voice on the other end sharp and clear. "We know what you've been up to," the voice said, a coldness seeping through the words. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." She recognized the voice immediately. It was Langston. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly regained her composure. She glanced at Jack, who had been sitting across the room, going over a stack of papers. He stood up, his eyes locking with hers. "What did he say?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with tension. Evelyn held up the phone, her hand trembling. "He knows," she whispered, the realization sinking in. "We're running out of time." Jack didn't hesitate. He moved swiftly, grabbing the folder with the documents they had gathered. "Then we'll move fast," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll take this to the authorities before he has a chance to act." But Evelyn wasn't so sure. "And what if he has connections? What if the police are on his side?" she asked, doubt creeping into her voice. Jack looked at her, his gaze hardening. "Then we go over his head," he replied. "We find someone we can trust, someone who will listen. We can't back down now, not after everything we've uncovered." Evelyn nodded, her face hardening with determination. "You're right," she said. "We've come this far, and I'm not going to stop now." The two of them moved quickly, gathering all the evidence they could find, making sure nothing was left behind. The truth was within reach, and they couldn't afford to waste a single moment. The following morning, they made their way to a small office on the outskirts of town, a quiet, inconspicuous place where they had arranged to meet someone they hoped would help them. As they entered the office, they were greeted by a man in his mid-40s, sharp-eyed and dressed in a suit that spoke of quiet authority. "Evelyn Shaw," he said, extending his hand. "I've been expecting you." His grip was firm, his handshake businesslike, but there was something about the way he looked at them, something that suggested he already knew more than he was letting on. Evelyn's nerves fluttered, but she kept her composure. "You're the one who can help us?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. The man nodded, motioning for them to sit. "I'm Detective Aaron Hayes," he said. "I've been following Langston for a while now. He's too powerful to take down with just a few pieces of evidence, but with what you've gathered, we might have a chance." Jack raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "So you're on our side?" he asked, his voice low. Detective Hayes smiled slightly, a glimmer of something unreadable in his eyes. Let's just say I've been waiting for someone to come along and expose Langston for what he really is. I've been in this game long enough to know when someone has the goods. He paused, his expression growing serious. Langston won't go down easily, but with your evidence, we can put together a case that'll be hard for him to escape. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy, but it's our best shot. Evelyn's heart raced as she listened to him. She had hoped for a breakthrough, but hearing it from someone with authority gave her a sense of urgency. What do we need to do? She asked, her voice sharp with resolve. We need to move fast, Detective Hayes replied. I'll make the necessary calls, but you two need to lay low. Langston's people are always watching. The last thing we want is for him to get wind of what we're doing before we're ready. The weight of his words hung in the air as Evelyn nodded, taking a deep breath. We'll do whatever it takes, she said. We've come too far to back out now. The detective gave a nod of approval. Good. Then let's get to work. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and tense preparations. Detective Hayes kept them in the loop, feeding them information and guiding them as they prepared for the final push. Evelyn felt the walls closing in, the pressure mounting, but she knew they were getting closer to the truth. She couldn't afford to stop now, not when the stakes were so high. The night before their final meeting with the authorities, Evelyn found herself standing in the living room of the mansion, looking out over the grounds. The wind had picked up again, the trees swaying in the dark, the air heavy with anticipation. Jack joined her, standing silently at her side. Do you think we'll win? She asked, her voice softer than usual. Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable. I don't know, he said quietly. But we'll fight until the end. Evelyn nodded, the weight of the coming battle settling over her like a heavy cloak. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end, and she had no intention of losing. The next day, they would face Langston, and everything would change. The morning of their final meeting dawned gray and overcast, the clouds hanging low in the sky as if the world itself was holding its breath. Jack and Evelyn had barely slept, their minds too consumed with what was about to unfold. They had gathered everything they needed, the files, the evidence, and the recordings, knowing that today, everything would come to a head. The mansion was eerily quiet, the heavy silence pressing in on them as they made their final preparations. Jack stood by the window, his eyes scanning the grounds outside, always alert. Evelyn paced the room, her fingers running through her hair, clearly deep in thought. Are you ready? Jack asked, turning to face her. Evelyn stopped, her eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of doubt in her gaze, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, her voice steady, though there was a faint tremor in her hands. Jack nodded. We'll take him down, Evelyn. This ends today. They left the mansion and made their way to the small office where Detective Hayes had arranged the meeting. The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of the moment pressing down on them with every step. When they arrived, Detective Hayes was already there, waiting for them. He greeted them with a curt nod, his face grim. We don't have much time, he said, his voice low. Langston's people are already moving. We need to act now, before he can cover his tracks. They sat down, and Hayes spread out the documents on the table, carefully laying out the plan. I've made the necessary calls, he said, his finger tracing a line on one of the papers. The authorities are ready, but we need to strike fast. Langston is dangerous, and he won't go down without a fight. Evelyn looked at the papers in front of her, the weight of the situation settling over her like a cold blanket. What do we do now? She asked, her voice tight. Hayes looked at her, his expression hardening. We present the evidence. We give them everything, Langston's financial records, the insurance policy, the forged signature, everything. If we do this right, he won't be able to escape. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, the fear and determination mixing in a way she had never felt before. And if he tries to run? She asked. Hayes' eyes flashed with steel. Then we make sure he doesn't. We're going to put an end to this, once and for all. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. We've got this, he said, his voice reassuring. She nodded, taking a deep breath. It was time. The three of them left the office and made their way to the police station, where the authorities were waiting. As they entered, they were greeted by several officers who had already been briefed on the situation. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a sense of purpose in the air. They presented the evidence, one piece at a time, laying it all out in front of the officers. As the officers reviewed the documents, the room fell silent. The only sound the rustling of paper and the occasional murmur of disbelief. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, one of the officers looked up, his face pale. This is enough to arrest him, he said, his voice steady but filled with shock. Evelyn exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Are you sure? She asked, her voice shaky. The officer nodded. This is enough to bring him down. We'll move on this immediately. Hayes gave a satisfied nod. It's done then. Let's take him down. They moved quickly, putting their plan into action. The officers, with Hayes leading them, made their way to Langston's estate. As they arrived, the tension was almost unbearable, but there was a sense of certainty in the air. This was it. Langston's time was up. When they reached the front gates, they were met with resistance. Langston's men had been tipped off and were ready to fight, but the authorities were well prepared. The battle that ensued was fast and fierce, but it was clear who would come out victorious. Within minutes, Langston was in custody, his attempts to flee thwarted. The officers read him his rights, and Evelyn, standing nearby, watched as the man who had caused her so much pain was finally brought to justice. She felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief wash over her. It was over. The man who had taken so much from her was finally being held accountable for his actions. Jack stood beside her, his hand resting on her back, offering silent support. We did it, he said softly. Evelyn nodded, her gaze fixed on Langston as he was escorted into the back of the police car. Yes, she said, her voice steady. We did. The sound of the engine starting up filled the air, and as the police car pulled away, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle over her for the first time in months. The battle was over, but the war had changed her forever. Jack turned to her, his expression soft. What now? He asked. Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart lighter than it had been in so long. Now, she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. I can finally start living again. It had been weeks since the arrest, but the weight of the events still hung heavily in the air. Evelyn had returned to her daily life, though everything felt different now. The mansion, once a place of dread, had started to feel like home again. It was no longer just a monument to loss, but a space where she could rebuild, a space where she could finally breathe. Jack was still by her side, though now their connection had deepened in ways neither of them expected. They spent more time together, not just solving cases or dealing with the aftermath of the chaos, but also learning about each other, growing closer with each passing day. One evening, as the sun set behind the mansion, casting a warm golden glow over the grounds, Evelyn sat outside on the terrace, her fingers tracing the rim of a wine glass. Jack joined her, sitting down across from her, his presence as comforting as always. How are you holding up? He asked, his voice soft but steady, always attentive to her well-being. Evelyn took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Better, I think, she said, her voice light, though it carried the heaviness of everything she had been through. I've been able to sleep at night now. The nightmares don't come as often. She paused, her eyes shifting to Jack. It's strange, you know. I spent so long in that house, living with the ghosts of the past, and now it feels like it's mine again. Not his. Mine. Jack nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. He knew what she meant. He had seen the toll it had taken on her, the way she had carried the weight of the past on her shoulders, even when it felt like the world was against her. You deserve peace, he said softly. Evelyn smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I'm starting to believe that. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the night settling around them. The crickets chirped, and the breeze stirred the leaves in the trees. It was a calm, serene moment, one they both needed after everything they had been through. Jack broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. I've been thinking a lot lately, he said. Evelyn turned toward him, curious. About what? About us, Jack replied. There was a brief pause as Evelyn processed his words, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up, but now that he had, she realized she had been thinking the same thing. She gave him a small smile, her eyes softening. I've been thinking about that, too. Jack leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady and full of intent. Evelyn, I want to be with you. Not just as your partner in this case, but in life. I know it's been a crazy ride, but I can't ignore how I feel about you." Evelyn's heart fluttered in her chest, the emotions rising within her like a wave. She had never expected to find love again, not after everything she had been through, but here, in this moment, it felt real. It felt possible. She reached out, her hand resting gently on his. "Jack," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I want that too. I want to be with you. I never thought I could feel this way again. But you've shown me that there's hope." Jack smiled, a look of relief and happiness crossing his face. "Then let's start this new chapter together," he said, his voice full of promise. Evelyn nodded, her heart full, a sense of peace washing over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The truth had been uncovered, justice had been served, and now, she could finally look forward to the future. A future where she wasn't alone. A future with Jack. As they sat together in the fading light, the world around them seemed to slow down, the weight of the past lifting with each passing moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn allowed herself to hope. The road ahead would not be without its challenges, but with Jack by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came their way. Together, months had passed since that day, and life had begun to find its new rhythm. Evelyn and Jack had become inseparable, not just in their work, but in every part of their lives. The mansion was no longer a place of sorrow and fear. It was a home filled with the promise of new beginnings. The evidence against Harold Langston had been enough to bring him down completely, and Evelyn could finally breathe easy knowing that the man who had haunted her life was no longer a threat. Yet, despite the peace she had found, there was still a lingering question at the back of her mind. What came next? She had always been defined by her past, the wealth, the power, the tragedy. But now that all of that was behind her, she wasn't sure who she was without it. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the background, Evelyn found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. Jack sat beside her, his presence always grounding her, but tonight, he seemed to sense the unease in her. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently, his voice soft but probing. She hesitated, then sighed, glancing at him. "I keep thinking about the future. I know I should be happy, but I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something, not sure what's waiting for me." Jack took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "You've been through so much. It's okay to feel unsure. But you're not alone anymore, Evelyn. We'll figure it out together." She smiled at him, a small but genuine smile. "I know. I never expected to be here, to be starting over. I thought I had everything figured out, but now I realize how much I didn't know. How much I've been missing." Jack squeezed her hand. "We all find our way in different ways. You're not alone in this, and you don't have to have everything figured out right now." Evelyn nodded, taking comfort in his words. She knew he was right. She had spent so much of her life trying to control everything, trying to make sense of the chaos. But now, she realized that it was okay to let go and see where life took her. It was a lesson she was still learning. "I want to make a difference," she said suddenly, her voice filled with newfound determination. "Not just for myself, but for others. I've seen too much pain, too much loss. I want to help people who feel as lost as I once did." Jack raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Is that so? What kind of difference do you want to make?" Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I don't know yet. Maybe I'll start small. Maybe I'll volunteer at a shelter or work with organizations that help those who've been through trauma. But I don't want to just sit here and wait for life to pass me by. I want to be part of something bigger, something that matters." Jack's smile grew wider, his eyes filled with admiration. "I think that's a great idea," he said, his voice full of pride. "And I'll be right here with you, supporting you every step of the way. Whatever you decide, you've got me." Evelyn leaned in, kissing him gently on the cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know where this journey will take me, but I know I'm not facing it alone." Jack pulled her into a warm embrace, holding her close as they sat in the quiet of the evening. The world outside had stopped, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn felt at peace. She had come so far, from the darkness and the pain to this moment of clarity. There was still so much left to figure out, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready for whatever came next. And with Jack by her side, She knew that together, they could face anything. The road ahead might be uncertain, but for Evelyn, the future had never looked brighter. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and the comfort of Jack's presence surround her. This was just the beginning, and whatever happened next, she knew she was ready to embrace it with open arms. As the months went by, Evelyn's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The weight of the past, though never fully gone, became something she could carry with strength, no longer a burden but a part of her story. She found herself waking up each day with a renewed sense of purpose. The mansion, now fully hers, had transformed into more than just a place of memories. It had become the canvas for her future. Jack was still by her side, and their bond had deepened into something neither of them had expected, but both were grateful for. What started as a partnership in uncovering the truth had blossomed into a partnership in life. They had spent months building something that felt solid and real, something that had been absent from both of their lives for far too long. Evelyn had begun to volunteer at a local shelter, offering her time and her experiences to those who needed help, and it felt like she was finally making the difference she had always longed for. Each day, she felt herself healing a little more, finding a purpose beyond her own pain, and giving back in ways that were both meaningful and rewarding. Jack had his own role in this, supporting her, and slowly, he had found peace within himself as well. Though his past was far different from hers, the connection they had shared had allowed him to let go of old wounds and look forward to the future with optimism. One evening, after a particularly long day of work at the shelter, Evelyn came home to find Jack waiting for her in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, looking thoughtful, and when he saw her, he smiled warmly. "How was today?" he asked, his voice soft but full of curiosity. Evelyn sat beside him, exhausted but content. "It was good," she replied, leaning back into the couch. "I feel like I'm finally doing something that matters. But there's still so much to do, so much to change." Jack took her hand, gently squeezing it. "One step at a time," he said. "You're doing more than most people could ever dream of." Evelyn smiled at him, grateful for his constant support. "I just want to keep going," she said, her voice filled with determination. "There's still so much to learn, so many people to help. I know I can't fix everything, but I'll keep trying." Jack's expression softened, and he leaned in, kissing her forehead gently. "I know you will," he said, his voice full of admiration. "And I'll be here with you, every step of the way." As they sat together in the quiet of the evening, Evelyn realized just how far she had come. The pain and loss that had once consumed her life no longer defined her. She had found a new sense of purpose, a sense of peace that she never thought she would find again. She had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about accepting it and using it to build something better. Together, they had created a life that was full of hope and possibility. Jack pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his embrace. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was running from anything. She was moving forward, one step at a time, with a sense of purpose and a clear direction. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt like she was ready to face whatever came her way. With Jack by her side, she knew that they could face anything together. And as the night stretched on, with the sound of the wind rustling the trees outside and the soft glow of the fireplace warming the room, Evelyn closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found peace, love, and purpose, and for the first time in a long time, the future seemed full of promise.